Now then, this morning's newspapers are full of more details about the two Woolwich terror suspects. The revelations raise questions about our intelligence services. What did they know? What did they do? And could they have prevented Wednesday's brutal attack? Well, I'm joined now by Peter Clark. He was the head of counter-terrorism with the Metropolitan Police from 2002 to 2008. And from Birmingham, I'm joined by Ghaffar Hussain from the Quilliam Foundation, an anti-extremist think tank. And if I can start with you first, Peter Clark. It's a question we can't answer, can we? Could this have been prevented? Nevertheless, it seems these two suspects did come across the so-called radar of the intelligence services.
Well, there's an extent to which you could say it would be even more worrying if they hadn't been somewhere on the radar. But the whole point is that it's a question of assessment. Some time ago, the head of MI5 at the time, Jonathan Evans, said that you have to take into account all the information that's available and you have to make a judgment about who poses a threat to the public. He expressed it as you have to deal with the crocodiles nearest the boat. And that's a simple fact. You have to make judgments, assessments, and then deploy what resources you have, and they're far from limitless against those people who are assessed to be the most threat.
Nevertheless, there are lessons to be learned clearly from what's happened here, and there's the very big important question here for the family of Lee Rigby. They need to know answers to some of these questions, and they want them as soon as possible.
I think that's absolutely right. Remember, the same questions were asked after 7/7. Could it have been prevented? Because some of the people there were indeed known to the authorities. But it took near enough 6 years until the coroner's inquest came to the conclusion that actually the attack couldn't have reasonably been prevented. Now, throughout that time, the injured and the relatives of those who lost their lives and were injured were left wondering whether it should have been prevented. Now, I think in this case, the family really need to know much sooner, as soon as possible. And so I think it's very good that this week there will be a report to the Intelligence and Surveillance Committee of Parliament.
Let me bring in Ghaffar Hussain there from Birmingham. And Ghaffar Hussain, do you feel somehow that clues were missed, and some of the clues came from within the Muslim community itself?
Yeah, well, certainly in this case, I think it's quite clear this individual was known to the intelligence services. He travelled to Kenya to try to join up with a terrorist organisation there. He had attended many rallies with a banned extremist organisation, so the intelligence service should have kept a tab on him. So I think there has been failings. I mean, the security services have done a great job over the past 4 or 5 years, but there has been quite clear failings in this case. And I don't think it's good enough to say that, there was a lack of resources, because, they should have the resources to protect the public. That's something that should be prioritised. So on this case, I think there has been failings.
But is it all down to the intelligence services to police and investigate things like this, or isn't it also down to decent thinking people around them, or who may come into contact with people like these, to say to someone in authority, I'm a little bit worried about what they might do?
Ultimately, the responsibility does come down to the security services. It's their job to prevent these kinds of attacks from happening. They've got the powers, they've got the authority, they've got the ability to prevent it, they've got the ability to follow people, monitor people. Ordinary members of the public don't have those powers, don't have that ability. What they can do is report concerns. And I don't know if concerns have been reported with these two particular individuals. I would suspect they have, because they were known radicals, and they were quite open about their views. They weren't exactly necessarily hiding them. And people should come forward when they counter these kinds of views. But it's sometimes difficult for ordinary members of the public to tell whether it's just bluster or how serious someone is, or whether they're planning an attack or not. But security services, they should have that kind of information, because we've seen with previous plots, they have actually monitored and bugged people that they're concerned about. So they have the intelligence to make a move, whereas ordinary members of the public don't.
And Peter Clark, people who operate like this, or seem to have operated like this, often dubbed lone wolves, they're very, very hard for the security services to really identify.
Well, obviously it's more difficult to assess the intentions of an individual as opposed to perhaps a terrorist network, where it might be easier through collective monitoring of that network to understand what it is that the threat is that they actually pose. But I find the concept of lone wolf a difficult one, because clearly these people this week weren't lone wolves. We know that they're associated with other people with a similar way of thinking. And the thing is that underpinning everything they do, there is an ideology. So when you're attacking a network, you're attacking an organisation or a structure. But when you're looking at individuals, you have to understand how far have they been poisoned, how far are their actions being influenced by the pernicious ideology that violent extremism.
But it's much more difficult to identify that, isn't it? It's much more difficult to identify that chain than if terrorists were planning a bombing spectacular where they just need the practical armaments, and then you look at the supply chain, you look at the training, you can identify those. You're looking for ideas here, effectively.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's why it's so difficult, and why, as Sadiq Khan said a few moments ago, the authorities need to have the full range of proportionate powers available to them to try and assess and understand and prevent terrorist attacks.
And let me bring Ghaffar Hussain back in on that, because this goes to the core of it, doesn't it? The issue of radicalisation. What more can the Muslim community do about the issue of these preachers that seem to call hate preachers, ideas that really run counter to the views that just more or less everybody else has?
Yeah, unfortunately, there'll always be a minority of individuals in any community, really, that will have extremist views, that will have views that the vast majority of people reject and wish to challenge. Within the Muslim community, in Muslim communities in the UK, I think there are challenges around imams not being able to speak English, about women not having access to mosques, and other challenges as well within communities. These are communities in many cases that live in economically deprived areas, still struggling to integrate and adapt to British life, if you like. So there are challenges there. But this battle's been going on for 20 years. There has been, this kind of battle been waging within Muslim communities between extremists on one hand and those that kind of reject that kind of extremist, politicised, violent view on the other hand. So more needs to be done, yes. Local authorities, government, civil society actors, political activists, journalists, everyone needs to do more. Everyone needs to come out and challenge these ideas very openly. There needs to be a civil society-led challenge to undermine extremist ideas wherever they come from.
Where do you stand then when you talk about challenging those ideas openly? Where do you stand then on giving airtime, giving the oxygen of publicity to those that do have very radical views? Do you think they should be out in the open and be openly challenged, or they shouldn't be allowed to be expressed in public?
Well, I think people have, there's a balance here between challenging extremist views and freedom of speech. If someone isn't breaking the law, they should be allowed to express their views. However, as I think one of your previous guests said, the media has been a bit irresponsible here by wheeling out Anjem Choudhury on a regular basis and asking him his views on this topic. This is an individual that most people find repulsive, and to wheel him out and to seek his views and his perspective on the world is really not helpful. So we need to know what people think, and we need to be able to challenge those views. But to give an uncritical platform to a hate preacher, I think is very, very dangerous and misleading.
I just want to ask Peter Clark about that. I mean, would you go along with that or go even further? I mean, those of us sitting here remember the days of the old Sinn Féin speech ban and all that. Do we need something formal, some legislation perhaps, to stop people expressing these views?
Well, there is legislation that can deal with some of this, but of course Anjem Choudhury is very, very careful not to step over the line, because he knows full well that most of the time, if he actually said what he meant, he would be arrested, prosecuted and put in jail. Now, many people think that's where he should be, but he's very careful about this. He has a legal background himself. He knows where the boundaries are, and he's exploiting them.
I want to ask you both as well about the other issue that has really raised its head after this, is the revival of the Data Communications Bill, the so-called Snoopers Charter. Where do you stand on that, Peter Clark, from your side of the fence, from your background?
Well, look, during the 6 years, near enough, that I was in charge of the police side of counter-terrorist investigations, I can't remember a single case where data communications was not a vital part in either preventing an attack or leading to prosecution. And that includes the airlines plot in 2006, when several thousand people could well have been killed had we not had access to the full range of surveillance capabilities, and communications data is one part of that. So I actually fully subscribe to the views expressed this week by some very eminent people: Lord Reid, former Home Secretary; Lord Carlisle, former independent reviewer of terrorist legislation, who probably knows more about this than almost anybody, and Lord West, former Security Minister. I agree with them that it's important that the bill should be looked at, and as quickly as possible the intelligence agencies and the police be given the opportunity to actually keep up with modern technology, because that's all that this bill is about.
So would you underline Bernard Hogan Howe, the current Met Commissioner, said last year that it's a matter of life and death? Would you go that far?
Yes, it's quite a dramatic way of putting it, but essentially, yes. If the ability to stop terrorist attacks is there, then clearly, potentially, it could be a matter of life and death.
Ghaffar Hussain, your view on that data communications bill, the Snoopers Charter, do you think that it might be misused and perhaps target individuals, people from different communities disproportionately?
Yeah, there is dangers with going over the top and becoming, a Orwellian-like state. But I think, what does need to happen is individuals who've come on the radar for, openly espousing extremist views, or in this case, actually seeking to travel abroad to join an extremist organisation, open attending rallies, denouncing, ordinary Muslims and mainstream society, and openly expressing views that are quite clearly bigoted and violent. Those kind of individuals do need to be monitored, and I think it's not unreasonable to follow such individuals and follow their communications. But I don't think an open system where you just monitor everyone's emails and text messages, I think that's quite dangerous. That's probably taking it a bit too far.
OK, Ghaffar Hussain, thank you very much indeed. Now, thanks to Peter Clark here in the studio. Good to talk to you both.